The dust swirled across the barren landscape as Nathan Porter watched the stagecoach disappear over the horizon, taking with it the woman who had, in just 3 short months, become the center of his world. Behind him, the ranch house stood silent, haunted by memories still fresh and painful. Nathan sighed, turning back to face the reality he'd chosen a lonely existence on the vast Wyoming frontier, where the only companionship he could count on was his 10-year-old son, Illy, and the unforgiving land they called home, Wyoming Territory, 1878. The West was still wild, still dangerous, and still no place for a city woman like Willa Kendrick. "Pa," Illy's voice cut through Nathan's thoughts as the boy appeared at his side, his small hand reaching up to tug at the worn sleeve of his father's shirt. Nathan looked down into eyes that mirrored his own, the same shade of determined blue that his late wife had once said could calm a storm or start one. "Pa, the stagecoach ain't too far gone yet. We could still catch it." Nathan shook his head. "Let her go, son. Miss Kendrick belongs back east with fancy dresses and proper gentlemen, not out here with the likes of us." Illy's face hardened with a resolve that seemed too mature for his young years. "That's not true, and you know it. She belongs here with us." The boy tugged again at his father's sleeve, harder this time, his voice rising with determination. "If you don't ask her to stay, I will." Nathan stared at his son, surprised by the challenge in the boy's voice. When had he grown so bold, so certain? The thought of Willa staying, of her bright smile lighting up their home every morning, of her gentle laugh filling the spaces that had been silent since Mary died giving birth to Elliot, was almost too painful to consider. "It's not that simple, Illy." "It is that simple, Pa. You love her." "She loves you, and I," Illy's voice caught. "I need a mother." The words struck Nathan like a physical blow. For 3 years after Mary's death, he'd wandered in a fog of grief, barely able to care for himself, let alone a child. Then, 6 months ago, his sister-in-law had written to say she could no longer keep Illy in Philadelphia. The boy needed his father, she'd written. And so Illy had arrived, a stranger to Nathan, carrying a small valise and wearing an expression of wary hope that broke what remained of Nathan's heart. They'd struggled those first months. Nathan knew nothing about raising a child, and Illy, having spent most of his life in the city, found the harsh realities of ranch life overwhelming. That was when Willa had appeared, stepping off the stagecoach with her city clothes and determined expression, announcing she was the new schoolteacher for the town of Whispering Pines, 5 miles from Nathan's ranch. She'd rented the small cabin that sat on the edge of Nathan's property, the one he'd built years ago with dreams of expanding his family, and almost immediately, she'd begun to change their lives. First with small kindnesses, inviting Illy for reading lessons, bringing over fresh baked bread when she heard Nathan had been injured breaking a horse. Then with larger ones, nursing them both through a bout of influenza, standing up to the town's wealthiest rancher when he tried to bully Illy at the general store. Without meaning to, Nathan had fallen in love with her. And now she was gone, heading back to Boston because he'd been too stubborn, too afraid to ask her to stay. "Pa," Illy's voice broke through his thoughts, "the stagecoach is getting further away." Nathan looked down at his son's pleading face, then back at the distant cloud of dust. Something shifted inside him, a breaking away of the fear that had held him captive for so long. "Saddle up, Thunder," he said suddenly. "Quick now." Illy's face broke into a grin and he raced toward the stable. Within minutes, Nathan was mounted on his fastest horse, heart pounding as he spurred the animal forward, chasing the disappearing stagecoach with a desperation he hadn't felt in years. The stagecoach was making good time, but Thunder was faster, bred for the open plains and trained to run like the wind. Nathan pushed him harder, the landscape blurring around them as they galloped across the dusty terrain. His hat flew off, carried away by the wind, but he didn't slow to retrieve it. All that mattered was catching that coach before it reached the junction where Willa would transfer to the eastbound train. Finally, after what seemed like hours but could only have been 20 minutes at most, Nathan spotted the coach ahead. He urged Thunder forward with a shout, waving his arms to signal the driver. The coach continued for another 100 yards before the driver noticed him and gradually brought the team to a halt. Nathan pulled up alongside, Thunder dancing nervously as Nathan fought to catch his breath. The driver, a grizzled man named Harley who'd been running the route for 15 years, looked down with a knowing smirk. "Figured you might be showing up, Porter," he said. "Took you long enough." Nathan ignored him, dismounting quickly and moving to the coach door. His hands were shaking as he pulled it open, revealing Willa sitting alone inside, her eyes red-rimmed from crying, a handkerchief clutched in her gloved hands. "Nathan," she gasped, her voice catching on his name, "what are you doing here?" He stood there, suddenly tongue-tied, the words he'd rehearsed in his mind during the desperate ride evaporating under her gaze. Willa Kendrick was beautiful not in the delicate way of city women with their porcelain skin and careful manners, but in the way of someone who had found her strength and wore it like a second skin. Her auburn hair was escaping from its pins, framing a face that had grown sun-kissed during her time in Wyoming. Her green eyes, usually so bright and determined, were now clouded with confusion and a fragile hope that made Nathan's chest ache. He began, then stopped, swallowing hard. "I shouldn't have let you go. You made it quite clear how you felt," Willa said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "You said there was no future for me here." "I was wrong," Nathan admitted, the words coming easier now. "I was afraid, Willa. Afraid of caring for someone again, afraid of what might happen if I let myself love you." "And now," she asked quietly, "now I'm more afraid of living without you," he said honestly. "Illy told me if I didn't ask you to stay, he would. He's a smart boy, smarter than his father." "He knows what we need," Willa's eyes softened. "And what do you need, Nathan Porter?" "You," he said simply. "We need you, I need you, please come back with me." For a moment, Willa didn't respond, and Nathan felt his heart sinking. Then she smiled, a slow, radiant smile that transformed her face. "I was hoping you'd say that," she whispered, reaching for his hand. Nathan helped her down from the coach, his heart lighter than it had been in years. Harley tossed down her trunk, grumbling good-naturedly about love-struck fools making him fall behind schedule. Nathan secured the trunk to Thunder, then lifted Willa onto the horse's back, mounting behind her. Her body fit perfectly against his, and as they rode back toward the ranch, her head resting against his chest, Nathan knew with complete certainty that he'd made the right decision. Illy was waiting anxiously by the gate when they returned, his face breaking into a wide grin when he saw Willa riding with his father. He raced toward them, practically bouncing with excitement as Nathan dismounted and helped Willa down. "You came back." Illy shouted, flinging himself at Willa with such force that she staggered back, laughing as she caught him in her arms. "Your father can be very persuasive when he wants to be," she said, her eyes meeting Nathan's over Illy's head. "Does this mean you're staying for good?" Illy asked, his voice muffled against Willa's dress. Willa looked at Nathan, a question in her eyes. They hadn't discussed the future, not really. There had been no proposal, no formal declarations beyond the desperate plea at the stagecoach. Nathan cleared his throat. "Miss Kendrick and I have some things to talk about, son. Why don't you take Thunder to the stable and give him a good rub-down? He earned it today." Illy looked between them suspiciously, then nodded, taking the horse's reins. "Don't mess this up, Pa," he whispered loudly as he passed Nathan, making Willa laugh. Once they were alone, Nathan took Willa's hands in his. They were small but not delicate. These were hands that had learned to build fires, mend clothes, and even help deliver a foal during the harsh spring storms. They were the hands of a woman who had adapted to frontier life with a determination that had impressed even the most skeptical of the local ranchers' wives. "I don't have much to offer you," Nathan said honestly. "The ranch barely turns a profit most years. The winters are brutal and the work never ends. It's not the life you were raised for." "Perhaps not," Willa agreed. "But it's the life I've chosen. These past months have taught me that I'm stronger than I ever knew, and that happiness isn't found in fine parlors or at society balls. It's found in moments watching Illy master a difficult passage in his reading, seeing the first wildflowers bloom after the snow melts, sitting by the fire with you in the evenings when the day's work is done." Nathan's throat tightened with emotion. I love you, Willa Kendrick. I think I've loved you since that day you stood up to old man Crawford in the general store, telling him that bullying children didn't make him a big man, just a small one with a loud voice. Willa laughed, the sound carrying across the open yard. He was so shocked that a proper Eastern lady would speak to him that way that he couldn't even respond. You've never been just a proper Eastern lady, Nathan said, drawing her closer. You're the bravest, most stubborn, most beautiful woman I've ever known. Would you consider becoming Mrs. Nathan Porter? It won't be an easy life, but I swear to you I'll spend every day trying to make you happy. Tears filled Willa's eyes, but her smile was radiant. Yes, she said simply. Yes, I'll marry you, Nathan Porter. Nathan pulled her into his arms, his kiss conveying all the emotion he couldn't put into words. When they finally broke apart, breathless and laughing, they turned to see Illy watching from the stable doorway, his grin visible even from a distance. I think someone's been waiting for this moment even more than we have, Willa said softly. He's been without a mother for too long, Nathan replied, his arm still around her waist. And I've been without love for too long. You've brought both back into our lives, Willa. The next few weeks passed in a flurry of activity. Word spread quickly through Whispering Pines that the new schoolteacher was marrying Nathan Porter, and the community, always eager for any excuse to celebrate in the midst of their hard-working lives, embraced the news with enthusiasm. The women organized a small wedding celebration, while the men pitched in to help Nathan complete some long-neglected repairs to the ranch house. Willa continued teaching, riding to and from town each day on a gentle mare Nathan had purchased for her. The children were thrilled about their teacher's upcoming marriage, especially since it meant she wouldn't be leaving them to return east as she'd originally planned. Illy, proudest of all, made sure everyone knew that it was his intervention that had prompted his father to chase after Miss Kendrick. 2 days before the wedding, Nathan found Willa sitting on the porch steps of her small cabin, staring at a letter in her hands, her expression troubled. "Bad news?" he asked, sitting beside her, concerned by the worry lines creasing her forehead. "A letter from my sister," Willa said, folding the paper carefully. "My father is quite ill. Margaret says he's asking for me." Nathan felt a cold knot form in his stomach. "You need to go to him." Willa nodded slowly. "He and I have had our differences. He never approved of my decision to come west, thought I was throwing away my life and education. But he's still my father." "Of course you must go," Nathan said firmly, though the thought of her returning to Boston, even temporarily, filled him with dread. "We can postpone the wedding." Willa turned to him, her expression suddenly fierce. "No, we will not postpone. I won't risk losing what we found because of more delays." She took his hand, her grip surprisingly strong. "We'll marry as planned, and then I'll go to Boston as Mrs. Porter, not Miss Kendrick. I'll see my father, make my peace with him, and return home to you and Illy as quickly as possible." "Are you certain?" Nathan asked, searching her face. "Your family might try to convince you to stay." Willa laughed softly. "They can try, but nothing could keep me from returning to you, Nathan. This is my home now. You and Illy are my family." The wedding took place on a clear autumn day, with the mountains rising majestically in the distance and the first hints of gold touching the aspen leaves. The entire town turned out for the occasion, gathering in the small white church that served as both school and meeting place during the week. Willa wore a simple blue dress that brought out the green in her eyes, with wildflowers woven into her upswept hair. Illy, scrubbed clean and uncomfortable in his Sunday best, stood proudly beside his father, holding the simple gold band Nathan would place on Willa's finger. As they exchanged vows, Nathan was struck by the journey that had brought them to this moment, from their first prickly encounters when Willa had arrived in town, to the gradual thawing as she'd proven herself more than capable of handling frontier life, to the deep friendship that had blossomed into love. He remembered the pain of watching her board that stage coach, thinking he would never see her again, and the exhilaration of racing after her, knowing that his future happiness depended on catching her before she disappeared from his life forever. "I now pronounce you man and wife," the preacher declared. and Nathan pulled Willa into a kiss that drew cheers and a few good-natured whistles from the assembled townsfolk. Later, as they celebrated with food and music in the town square, Illy tugged at Willa's hand. "Does this mean I can call you Ma now?" he asked, his expression serious. Willa knelt down to his level, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "I would be honored if you did, Illy, but only if you're ready. I know your mother will always hold a special place in your heart." Illy nodded solemnly. "Pa says my real Ma is watching over me from heaven. He says she'd be happy I have you now." "Your father is a wise man," Willa said, hugging him close. "And I promise you, Illy Porter, that I will love you as if you were my own son for all the days of my life." The boy's arms tightened around her neck. "I love you, Ma," he whispered, testing out the word. 3 days later, Nathan and Illy stood on the platform of the small railway station, watching as Willa prepared to board the eastbound train. She wore her city clothes again, a tailored traveling suit and a small hat that Nathan thought made her look like a stranger. But when she turned to him, her eyes were the same clear, direct, filled with love and determination. 3 weeks, she promised, squeezing his hands. 4 at the most. "I'll be back before the first snow." "We'll be counting the days," Nathan said, trying to keep his voice steady for Illy's sake. "Right when you can." "Every day," she promised. She knelt to embrace Illy, who was fighting back tears. "Take care of your pa for me," she whispered. "Don't let him brood too much." Illy nodded, his lips pressed tightly together to hold in his emotions. "Bring me a book from Boston," he asked hopefully, making Willa laugh. "I'll bring you too," she promised. "And something special to remind you that I was thinking of you every day." The train whistle blew and Willa rose, giving Nathan one last, lingering kiss. "I love you, Nathan Porter," she said fiercely. "Never doubt that." "And I love you, Willa Porter," he replied, savoring the sound of her new name. "Come back to us safely." They watched as the train pulled away, Willa's face at the window, her hand raised in farewell until she was just a blur in the distance. The platform emptied around them, but still Nathan and Illy stood, staring at the point where the train had disappeared. "She'll come back, won't she, Pa?" Illy asked, his voice small. Nathan put his arm around his son's shoulders, drawing him close. "Yes," he said with a certainty that surprised him. "She'll come back. This is her home now." The days after Willa's departure stretched endlessly. Nathan threw himself into his work, pushing himself and his ranch hands harder than usual as they prepared for winter. Illy grew quiet, spending more time with his books, a habit he'd developed under Willa's influence, and often sitting on the porch in the evenings, watching the road that led to town as if expecting to see Willa appear at any moment. Letters arrived regularly, full of news of Boston and Willa's family. Her father was improving slowly, she wrote, though the doctors were not optimistic about a full recovery. Her sister Margaret was shocked by the news of Willa's marriage, and her brother-in-law even more so. They had apparently assumed she would come to her senses and remain in Boston, settling back into the life she'd left behind. "They don't understand," Willa wrote in one letter that Nathan read aloud to Illy by lamplight. "They see only what I've given up, the comforts of city life, the social connections, the cultural advantages. They cannot comprehend what I've gained, a life of purpose, a community that values substance over appearance, a family built on love rather than obligation. I miss you both terribly. Kiss Illy for me and tell him his mother's heart is counting the days until I can hold him again." Illy had smiled at that, though his eyes remained worried. "Do you think her fancy family will convince her to stay there?" he asked Nathan later that night as his father tucked him into bed. "No," Nathan said firmly. "Your mother knows her own mind. Nothing and no one could keep her from returning to us." But as the weeks passed and October gave way to November with no sign of Willa, Nathan found his own confidence wavering. The first snow fell, light and melting quickly, but a harbinger of the winter to come. Still no Willa. A letter arrived explaining that her father had taken a turn for the worse, and she couldn't bear to leave while he was so ill. She would come as soon as she could, she promised. Wait for her. "Of course we'll wait," Nathan muttered to himself as he folded the letter. Where else would we go? But the waiting was harder than he'd anticipated. He found himself checking the road a dozen times a day, riding into town more often than necessary just to see if there was news of the eastbound train. Illy grew increasingly withdrawn, and Nathan caught him crying one night, clutching the book Willa had been reading to him before she left. "She's not coming back, is she, Pa?" the boy sobbed. "Just like my real ma, she's gone forever." Nathan gathered his son into his arms, rocking him as he hadn't done since Illy was a toddler. "No, son, Willa's different. She gave her word and she'll keep it. You have to believe that." But as December arrived with still no word, Nathan's own faith began to falter. The letters had stopped coming 2 weeks earlier. Had Willa's family finally convinced her that she belonged in Boston? Had she realized that the comforts of city life outweighed the hardships of the frontier? Or worse, had something happened to her during her journey home? A week before Christmas, a fierce blizzard descended on Wyoming territory, blanketing the landscape in white and making travel impossible. The ranch was well stocked for winter, but Nathan found himself thinking of Willa, wondering if she was warm and safe in Boston, surrounded by her family for the holidays. Illy had stopped asking when she would return, a silence that worried Nathan more than the boy's earlier tears. Christmas Eve arrived, cold and clear after the storm. Nathan had done his best to make it special for Illy, cutting a small pine tree from their land and setting it up in the corner of the living room. There were presents beneath it, practical gifts mostly: a new coat for Illy, books, hand-carved wooden animals that Nathan had worked on late into the nights. But the festivities felt hollow without Willa. They were sitting at the kitchen table, finishing a simple supper when they heard the sound of sleigh bells in the distance. Illy's head shot up, his eyes widening. "Pa, do you hear that?" Nathan nodded, rising slowly from his chair. It could be neighbors, he told himself, trying to temper the hope rising in his chest. The Johnsons sometimes visited on Christmas Eve, bringing cookies and good wishes. But when he opened the door, it wasn't the Johnsons' sleigh approaching through the twilight. It was a hired coach from town, making its way slowly through the deep snow, a solitary figure bundled in furs visible inside. "Pa," Illy shouted, pushing past him and running into the snow, heedless of his lack of coat or boots. "Pa, it's her, it's Ma." Nathan followed more slowly, his heart hammering in his chest. The coach came to a stop and the door opened. Willa emerged, her face pale with fatigue but radiant with joy as she saw Illy racing toward her. She caught him in her arms, laughing and crying at once as she held him close. "You came back," Illy was saying over and over. "You really came back." "Of course I did," Willa said, kissing his cold cheeks. "I promised, didn't I? And porters keep their promises." She looked up then, her eyes finding Nathan where he stood frozen in place. For a moment, they simply stared at each other, months of longing and worry passing between them in a single glance. Then Nathan was moving, closing the distance between them in long strides, pulling her into his arms so fiercely that he lifted her off her feet. "You're home," he whispered against her hair, breathing in the scent of her, still the same despite the expensive perfume that clung to her city clothes. "God, Willa, I was starting to think, never," she interrupted, her arms tightening around his neck. "I would have crawled back to you on my hands and knees if necessary. The trains were delayed because of the snow, and then there was no mail service. I was frantic thinking you might believe I'd abandoned you." "I never doubted," Illy piped up loyally, though the tear tracks on his face told a different story. "I knew you'd keep your promise." Willa smiled down at him, then back at Nathan. "I have something for you," she said softly. "A Christmas gift of sorts, though it won't arrive for several months yet." Nathan looked at her questioningly, not understanding at first, then his gaze dropped to where her hand rested protectively over her stomach and his eyes widened in comprehension. "Willa," he breathed, "are you saying?" She nodded, tears spilling down her cheeks. "A baby," she confirmed, "our baby. I suspected before I left, but I wasn't certain until I was in Boston. The doctor there says everything is progressing well. He estimates the baby will arrive in early summer. A baby." Illy repeated, his eyes growing round. "I'm going to be a brother." "Yes, darling," Willa laughed, running her hand through his hair. "A big brother. I'm counting on you to help me, as I've never had a baby before." Illy puffed up with importance. I'll help, Ma, I promise. Nathan still hadn't spoken, overwhelmed by the news. A child, his child, their child. After losing Mary in childbirth, the thought of Willa facing the same dangers terrified him. But mixed with the fear was a joy so intense it nearly brought him to his knees. Nathan. Willa's voice was uncertain now. Are you pleased about the baby? He pulled her close again, more gently this time. Pleased doesn't begin to cover it, he said hoarsely. I'm overwhelmed, Willa, terrified and ecstatic all at once. That makes two of us, she admitted with a shaky laugh. But we'll face it together. Together, he agreed, placing his hand over hers on her still flat stomach. Always together. The driver of the coach had unloaded Willa's trunks more than she'd left with. Nathan noticed and was clearing his throat pointedly. Let's get you inside, Nathan said, suddenly aware that they were all standing in the snow, without proper clothes. You must be exhausted from your journey. Exhausted but happier than I've been in months, Willa said, allowing him to guide her toward the house. Oh, Nathan, Boston felt like a foreign country to me. All the social calls and proper behaviors, the endless conversations about people I no longer knew or cared about. My family thought I'd lost my mind, marrying a rancher and moving to the wilderness, as they called it. And what did you tell them? Nathan asked, helping her up the porch steps. Willa's smile was radiant in the lantern light. I told them I'd found what most people search for their entire lives and never find, a place where I belong, a man who loves me for exactly who I am, and a child who's claimed a piece of my heart forever. I told them I was going home for Christmas, and nothing would stop me. That night, after Ellie had finally gone to bed extracting promises from Willa that she would still be there in the morning, Nathan and Willa sat by the fire, her head resting on his shoulder as they savored the simple joy of being together again. I brought presents, Willa said sleepily. Books for Ellie, as promised. A new dress for myself that I hope will still fit when spring arrives, and for you, she hesitated. For you, I brought something that might seem strange at first. She rose and went to one of her trunks, returning with a small, cloth-wrapped bundle. My father died 2 weeks after I arrived in Boston, she said quietly, sitting beside him again. He was conscious near the end, and we were able to talk, really talk, perhaps for the first time in my life. I told him about you and Ellie, about the ranch and the school. And to my surprise, he listened. He said he'd been wrong to try to hold me back from the life I wanted. She unfolded the cloth, revealing an old pocket watch, its gold case worn smooth with age. This was his most prized possession, she explained, placing it in Nathan's hands. It belonged to his father and his father before him. He wanted you to have it as a welcome to the family, he said, his way of giving us his blessing. Nathan stared at the watch, deeply moved by the gesture. I wish I could have met him, he said finally. To thank him for raising the woman who's brought such joy into our lives. Willa leaned her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. He would have liked you, she said softly, once he got past his initial disapproval of your occupation and location. Nathan laughed, running his hand through her hair, loosened now from its pins and flowing down her back like a river of copper in the firelight. I've spent every day since you left dreaming of this moment, he said, having you back in my arms, planning our future together. And now we have even more to plan for, Willa said, guiding his hand to her stomach. A new life to welcome into our family. Are you afraid? Nathan asked quietly, knowing the dangers of childbirth on the frontier all too well. Willa considered the question honestly. Yes, she admitted. But not enough to regret or worry. Life is full of risks, Nathan. We can't hide from them. We can only face them with courage and hope. She turned in his arms to look at him directly. Are you afraid? Terrified, he acknowledged. But also filled with a hope I never expected to feel again after Mary died. You've given that back to me, Willa, hope for the future, belief that happiness isn't just something that happens to other people. I feel the same, she whispered, tracing the line of his jaw with gentle fingers. In Boston, surrounded by all the comforts and luxuries I grew up with, I felt empty. This is where I belong, Nathan, with you and Ellie, building something real together. The months that followed were busy ones for the Porter family. As news of Willa's pregnancy spread through the community, the women of Whispering Pines rallied around her, sharing advice, hand-me-down baby clothes, and time-tested remedies for morning sickness. Willa continued teaching until early May, when the increasingly obvious evidence of her condition and the discomfort of standing all day forced her to concede that it was time to rest. Illy, true to his word, appointed himself Willa's special helper, bringing her tea, reading to her when she was tired, and speaking to her growing belly with a seriousness that made both adults hide smiles. He had firm opinions about the baby's gender. It would be a boy, he insisted, because he needed a brother to teach important things like fishing and horseback riding. What if it's a sister? Willa asked one evening as they sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the distant mountains gold and pink. Illy considered this with a frown. I guess that would be all right, he conceded, but she'd have to be tough, no crying over spiders or mud. I think any daughter of your father's would likely be plenty tough, Willa assured him with a laugh, though she might still prefer dolls to fishing poles. As spring turned to summer and Willa's time drew closer, Nathan found himself increasingly anxious. He'd arranged for the doctor from Whispering Pines to stay at the ranch during her final week, and several of the local women with midwifery experience had promised to come at the first sign of labor. Still, he couldn't shake the memory of losing Mary, of holding her hand as she slipped away, too weak from blood loss and hours of difficult labor to even see the son she'd given her life for. Willa sensed his fears but refused to indulge them. This baby will arrive safely, and so will I, she told him firmly. I've never done anything halfway in my life, Nathan Porter, and I don't intend to start now with something as important as bringing our child into the world. Her confidence buoyed him, and when the pains began on a warm July morning, Nathan was as ready as he could be. Illy was sent to stay with neighbors, the doctor was summoned, and the women of the community arrived to take charge of the birthing room. The labor was long but uncomplicated. For hours, Nathan paced the living room, wincing at each cry from the bedroom, praying with a fervor he hadn't felt since childhood. Just after midnight, a new cry joined Willa's, the thin, indignant wail of a newborn taking its first breath. Mr. Porter, the doctor called, appearing in the doorway with a broad smile. Come meet your daughter, a girl. A daughter. Nathan moved as if in a dream, entering the bedroom where Willa lay propped against pillows, her face flushed and damp with sweat but radiating triumph. In her arms was a tiny bundle wrapped in a soft blanket. She's perfect, Willa whispered as Nathan sat carefully beside her on the bed. 10 fingers, 10 toes, and a set of lungs that suggest she'll be making her opinions known from an early age. Nathan gently folded back the blanket to reveal a small, red face framed by wisps of dark hair, his hair, not Willa's copper tresses. The baby's eyes were squeezed shut, her tiny fists clenched as if ready to fight the world. She's beautiful, he said, his voice cracking with emotion. Just like her mother. Would you like to hold her? Willa asked, already shifting the baby toward him. Nathan hesitated only briefly before gathering his daughter into his arms. She was so light, so fragile, yet there was a strength in the way she moved, already straining against the blanket that confined her. Hello, little one, he murmured. Welcome to the world. The baby's eyes opened at the sound of his voice, unfocused blue eyes that would perhaps darken to match his own, or perhaps change to reflect her mother's vivid green. For a moment, father and daughter regarded each other solemnly, forming a connection that Nathan knew would last a lifetime. What shall we call her? Willa asked softly. They had discussed names for months without reaching a firm decision. For a boy, they'd settled on William after Willa's father. For a girl, they'd considered Mary after Nathan's first wife, but Willa had gently suggested that perhaps their daughter deserved her own name, not one that would always connect her to loss. Hope, Nathan said suddenly, the word coming to him unbidden. Hope Porter. Because that's what she represents for all of us, hope for the future, for happiness, for a life filled with love. Willa's eyes filled with tears as she reached for his hand. It's perfect, she agreed, our little Hope. When Illy returned the next day, His disappointment at having a sister instead of a brother lasted approximately 30 seconds, the time it took for baby Hope to grasp his finger in her tiny hand and hold on with surprising strength. "She likes me," he announced with wonder, looking up at Willa and Nathan. "Of course she does," Willa said, smoothing his hair back from his forehead. "You're her big brother, her protector. She'll always look up to you." Illy nodded solemnly, accepting this responsibility with the seriousness that characterized everything he did. "I'll teach her everything," he promised, "even if she is a girl." As summer faded into autumn, the Porter family settled into a new routine centered around Hope's needs and rhythms. Willa recovered quickly from the birth, her natural energy returning with a force that sometimes exhausted Nathan just to witness. By September, she was back to teaching part-time, bringing Hope with her to school, where the little girl became a favorite with the older students. One evening in late October, just after Hope's 3rd month, Nathan sat on the porch, watching as Willa moved around the yard, pointing out the changing leaves to the baby in her arms. Illy was nearby, demonstrating his progress with a lasso, careful to stay far enough away that the rope wouldn't startle his sister. The scene before him was so perfect, so complete, that Nathan felt a momentary fear, the kind that comes when happiness seems too perfect to last. But then Willa looked up, catching his eye with a smile that chased the shadows from his heart. She came to sit beside him, settling Hope in his arms. "Penny for your thoughts, Mr. Porter," she said, leaning her head against his shoulder. "I was just thinking about the day you nearly left," Nathan admitted. "How close I came to letting you go because I was too stubborn, too afraid to admit I needed you." "Ah, but you had a secret weapon," Willa reminded him with a laugh. "A very determined son who wasn't about to let his father make the biggest mistake of his life." "Thank God for Illy," Nathan agreed, looking at the boy who was now trying to teach their dog to jump through the lasso. "If he hadn't tugged my sleeve that day and told me if I didn't ask you to stay, he would." He shook his head, unable to complete the thought. "We owe him a debt we can never repay," Willa said softly, "but I think we're making a good start by giving him the family he deserves." Hope stirred in Nathan's arms, her small face scrunching briefly before relaxing again into sleep. He marveled at how someone so tiny could inspire such overwhelming love, such fierce protectiveness. "I never thought I'd have this again," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "A family. A home filled with laughter instead of silence, a future worth planning for." Willa took his free hand, threading her fingers through his. "Neither did I," she admitted. "When I came west, I was running from the life my family had planned for me: a suitable marriage, a proper Boston household, children raised by nannies while I attended charity luncheons and garden parties. I thought teaching would be enough, that I could be content with independence and purpose. And instead you got a ready-made family with more challenges than comforts," Nathan said ruefully. "Hard work from dawn till dusk, a stepson who tested your patience at every turn those first months, and a husband who nearly let you go because he couldn't see what was right in front of him." "I got exactly what I needed," Willa corrected him firmly. "A partner who respects me, challenges me, and loves me completely, a son who's taught me more about patience and joy than any book ever could, and now this little miracle." She touched Hope's cheek gently. "I got a home, Nathan. A real home." 5 years passed, bringing changes both great and small to the Porter family. The ranch prospered under Nathan's careful management, allowing them to build a larger house with a proper classroom where Willa could teach Illy and Hope alongside several neighboring children. Hope grew into a spirited, curious child with her father's dark hair and her mother's determined personality. Illy, now 15, had developed into a thoughtful young man who excelled at both his studies and ranch work. And there were 2 more Porter children: 3-year-old William, named for Willa's father as planned, and 1-year-old Daniel, whose arrival had nearly coincided with the completion of the new house. The family that had once consisted of just Nathan and Illy, both wounded by loss and uncertainty, had blossomed into something neither could have imagined. On the 5th anniversary of Nathan and Willa's wedding, the family gathered for a special celebration. The children had conspired with Nathan to surprise Willa with gifts they'd prepared in secret a drawing from Hope. A carved wooden box from Ellie for Willa's treasured letters, and flowers picked by William with Daniel toddling behind him. As they sat together after the younger children were in bed, Ellie approached with something hidden behind his back. He'd grown tall in the past year, nearly reaching Nathan's height, his boyish features maturing into those of the man he would soon become. "I have something for both of you," he said, unusually serious even for him. "I've been working on it for months." He handed them a small leather-bound book. Opening it, they found page after page of careful sketches, scenes from their life together over the past 5 years. There was Willa holding newborn Hope, Nathan teaching Ellie to break a horse, the whole family gathered around the fireplace on a winter evening. "Ellie," Willa breathed, turning the pages slowly. "These are beautiful. I had no idea you could draw like this." The young man now, really shrugged, embarrassed by the praise. "Mrs. Johnson at school said I had a talent for it. She's been giving me extra lessons." "Son, these are extraordinary," Nathan said, genuinely impressed by the skill evident in each drawing. "You've captured us all perfectly." Ellie fidgeted, clearly working up to something more. "There's something else," he said finally. "I've been offered an apprenticeship with a painter in Denver. Mrs. Johnson arranged it. He saw some of my work and said I have real potential." Nathan and Willa exchanged glances, both recognizing the significance of this moment. Ellie was offering them a glimpse of his future, a future that would eventually take him away from the ranch, from the life they'd built together. "That's wonderful news," Willa said, reaching for his hand. "When would this start?" "Next fall," Ellie said. "After I finish school, I'd come home for holidays and summers, at least at first." "Denver's not so far," Nathan said, his voice gruff with pride and the bittersweet realization that his son was growing up. "We could visit, see how you're getting on." "Then you think I should accept?" Ellie asked, looking between them anxiously. "I think you should follow your heart," Nathan told him, rising to put a hand on his shoulder. "That's what I did when I chased after your mother, and it's the best decision I ever made." "And I think," Willa added with a smile, "that the world would be much poorer if it were deprived of your talent, Ellie Porter. Yes, we'll miss you terribly, but we'd never stand in the way of your dreams." Later that night, after Ellie had gone to bed, Nathan and Willa stood on the porch of their home, looking out at the land that had sustained their family for generations and would continue to do so for many more. "Our boy's growing up," Nathan said softly. "Soon he'll be off to make his own way in the world. And doing it brilliantly," Willa added, leaning into his embrace. "He'll always come back to us, Nathan. This will always be home to him, just as it is to me." Nathan thought back to that pivotal moment 5 years earlier, standing in the yard, watching the stagecoach disappear, feeling as if his future was vanishing with it. Then Ellie's small hand tugging at his sleeve, the boy's voice filled with a wisdom beyond his years. "If you don't ask her to stay, I will." Such a simple action, such profound consequences. If not for his son's intervention, Nathan might never have known this happiness, this sense of completeness. Willa might have returned to Boston permanently, living a life of comfortable emptiness. Their 3 youngest children would never have existed. Ellie himself might have grown up lonely and resentful, lacking the maternal love that had helped him flourish. "What are you thinking about?" Willa asked, noticing his silence. Nathan smiled, pulling her closer as the stars emerged in the clear Wyoming sky. "I was thinking about second chances," he said, "and how sometimes the people who love us know what we need better than we do ourselves." Willa nodded, understanding immediately. "Ellie," she said softly, "our matchmaker." "Our matchmaker," Nathan agreed. "Who knew a 10-year-old boy could be so wise?" "Children often see the truth more clearly than adults," Willa said. "They haven't learned to complicate things with pride and fear." From inside the house came the soft cry of baby Daniel, waking for his nighttime feeding. Willa sighed, then smiled. "Duty calls." "I'll come with you," Nathan said, unwilling to let go of this moment, this feeling of profound gratitude for the life they'd built together. As they walked back into their home, arms around each other's waists, Nathan couldn't help but marvel at the journey that had brought them here, from strangers to friends to lovers to partners, in creating a family bound by love rather than merely blood. All because a boy had tugged his sleeve and challenged him to be brave enough to reach for happiness. "I love you, Willa Porter," he said as they paused in the doorway, the lamplight from within illuminating her face older now than when they'd met, lined with the evidence of laughter and occasional worry, but more beautiful to him than ever. "And I love you, Nathan Porter," she replied, her eyes reflecting the same wonder he felt at their shared journey. "Today, tomorrow, and for all the days that follow."